Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Aggressive Soapbox. So, here's another one with Cenk Uygur and it's not comment calls. I did a video the other day about Cenk Uygur and comment calls. Cenk Uygur was being unethical when he was using his platform in one capacity to attack another organization that was a pain in his ass in another capacity, or that capacity of Wolfpack. Some of his fanboys were hurt by this. They were like, "Oh, how dare you attack Cenk Uygur?" It was pretty pathetic. It's absolutely comical. You can see him on my blog. Check my other video out. You can see him on there. He's all hurt. It's funny. It's absolutely hilarious. He's going to love this one. Now, the difference between these two, in the first video, Cenk just bashed comment calls without really ever telling their issue. In this video, I have to give him credit. He brought on somebody who was against his position. So it's too long to show the whole thing, but I'm going to show the crux of the argument, because I think that's where the meat of it is. That's where the for and against is. That's where the earnest conversation is to be had. So let's take a look, see how it goes.
All right, so well, let's just set the background here for folks. Vermont was the first state to call for free and fair election reform, and that Wolfpack is a group that I founded. It's one of the other things I do other than being the host of the Young Turks, and that organization pushed for that. And what it really does is it calls for a convention to call for an amendment to the United States Constitution to get money out of politics, and we think that that's the best strategy and perhaps the only strategy available now to get that change that is so critical to the country. If I'm not mistaken, Senator Pearson, at the time you voted for that initially, right?
Yeah, I was a member of the Vermont House at the time, and I don't think we disagree on the horrors of money in politics. I think we're having a disagreement on how to fix it.
Yeah. I'm not sure I even can see that, but we'll get to that in a second, okay? So now you've gone in the opposite direction. There's a movement to rescind some convention calls. And let me again frame it for the audience, and to be fair to you, there are some progressives in the country who think, there's a balanced budget amendment push, which is a conservative push to get a convention, and so that they think that's dangerous. Now, I am among the people who think a balanced budget amendment is a disastrous idea. So in some of the states, there are calls for a balanced budget amendment convention for that topic. And they are looking to rescind that, and they're doing that today. But some are also calling to rescind all calls for a convention. And that is what is happening today in Vermont. And you led the effort to rescind the one on getting money out of politics. Again, tell me if I'm mistaken about that, and if I'm not mistaken, why did you decide to go in that direction?
And the balanced budget idea is being pushed by the Koch brothers, by ALEC. They love the idea of a constitutional convention for the same reasons that I and many progressives abhor it. Jack, I am really worried that we are hastening the fascist takeover of this country. I mean, let's not put too fine a point on it, right? The question you're asking is, why would Vermont want to rescind its call, which I did vote for? And the reason is this: I've learned since that time a couple of facts that I think are hard to dispute. You tell me where you're coming from. That there's no such thing as a constitutional convention that gets called for one or a limited purpose. Even Lessig acknowledges that once it's called and underway, sky's the limit. I mean, here in Vermont, we have town meetings for our local elections. And the last item on the agenda always, and if you're a town moderator, it's the thing you fear the most for hours while you're debating other things, other business. And there's no way that I'm aware of, and this is not really disputed, that you can limit what would be debated should you have a constitutional convention. That's what worries me. That's what worries me at a time when we've, wall-to-wall Republican control in this country, people who are acting way outside of the boundaries of what we would have thought of as conservative principles. And so that's where I start to get really nervous. Then there's this idea that Vermont's call for a constitutional convention for a totally different reason than a balanced budget could be combined with the 28 or 29 calls that are on the books right now for a balanced budget and used to add up to the 34. What is known about that is that Congress has the power to make that decision of whether or not you can combine two very different calls, reasons for a call, into one. And I just don't trust the current Congress at all to act in a sensible, straightforward way that most people would consider to be kind of normal. I don't think we've seen that. We've seen, in fact, them being all too willing to change the rules midstream, to reject decency at every turn and jam through a very, very aggressive agenda.
Yep. So let me clarify a number of things and answer some of the questions you posed and then pose some questions back. So first off, the Koch brothers are not for a convention on all grounds. I know that because they opposed Wolfpack in New Jersey. They sent their lobbyists to fight against a convention to get money out of politics. Of course, they love money in politics.
Of course.
So they are for a convention on their issues. And on that, I don't blame them. I'm for a convention on my issues, and I will fight them on their issues, and they will fight us on our issues. I think a convention is part of democracy, it's part of our Constitution, like the vote. We will fight them in elections, and they will fight us in elections. So now that gets the question of, can we combine things to get to a convention? Well, Senator, I'm positive that you do this with good intent, so I don't want the audience to get a wrong idea. I'm not as positive about the people who sent you those talking points. So do you know how many calls for a convention there are in the country right now?
The congressional research folks peg it at 28 for a balanced budget. I know there's been some 700 in the course of history.
Yep.
And I think there's now 5 for Citizens United question, if I'm not mistaken.
So there are, one part of that answer is correct. There's over 700 calls for a convention from 49 different states. Now, the reason we haven't had a convention is because they don't count them together. In fact,
they haven't counted them together. That's right.
That's right. And in fact, right now, if you combine, there's 120 live calls for a convention right now. They could do it if they wanted to. The ones that have been sent to Congress and that they have on the record is actually above 34. So if they could combine balanced budget and our call for convention and campaign finance ones and convention of the states, they would easily have a convention today. But yet we don't have a convention. So I don't understand how anyone could make the case that, well, they could just combine it. They could do that today, but they don't because they can't. It has to be on one issue. For all of American history, it has had to be on one issue. And today they have plenty. They could call for it tomorrow, but they don't do it because it has to be on one issue. And by the way, I'm not the only one saying that. Justice Department has said that, Congressional Research Service has said that, the American Bar Association has said that. So in the face of all of that evidence, I'm confused as to why anybody would not only continue to say they can combine them when it is counterfactual, but on top of that, to go and rescind one that is about money in politics seems curious when there's 695 others.
So a few points quickly. I think you're right that they haven't been combined historically for different reasons. I totally agree with that. We've also always been able to filibuster Supreme Court nominees, right, till this past week. So we're just dealing with a cast of characters in Congress right now who are very comfortable operating well outside of the normal rules. Congressional research.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I've never heard of the combining them together in that way. This is kind of a first. Typically, it has to be on one topic. Now, once you get there and you get to the convention, all bets are off. Those guys can do whatever they want. But Cenk is right on this point. I've never heard them say, well, we can combine these two topics together in order to force a constitutional convention. By the same token, I can't necessarily dismiss what the guy is saying. He's getting a little paranoid. Like it sounds like he's paranoid. He's like, look, these guys just gut the filibuster. Well, that's a constitutional process. I mean, that's something that they can do through the Senate. That's a little bit different than saying we're going to merge these things together and actually have a constitutional convention. That would be a mind-blowing change in policy. But again, I don't think you can dismiss the guy. Like, it's one of those things where I've never heard that before. I understand where the guy's coming from. I disagree that that's the strongest argument for it. I think Cenk is more right on this than the other guy. So let's keep going.
Pegs the number, to my knowledge, at 28 live calls right now. And I don't know why they've cut it off, but that is my understanding. And then, so maybe I'm wrong on this point, or it's a debatable point. And the thing I come across, and is that whoever is arguing these points, yours and my arguments are the ones you hear, basically, that I've heard in the last couple of weeks. Having confidence on either side is a pretty dodgy prospect, because we've never had it. We've never had a constitutional convention except for the very first one. That one, in fact, ran over the reasons why it was called and obliterated the rules and produced basically the beginning of our Constitution. You seem confident that I'm wrong. I'm confident that I'm right. If I'm right, then I'm taking a cautious approach because I don't want to open up the Constitution while these people are in charge. If you're wrong, what happens when they pull together a constitutional convention that repeals women's right to choice, repeals marriage equality, gives us unfettered access to guns, weakens voting rights? Do you really think these are the people that are gonna let us have a meaningful campaign finance reform? There's 34 states right now, wall-to-wall controlled by Republicans, and only 13 states on the Democratic side. The rest are somewhat mixed. This seems risky to me, and I appreciate your confidence. I just don't share it, and I think it's prudent to be a little cautious. Yeah. And I know that Vermonters' values are so starkly opposed to what's happening at our nation's capital that I think it's I'm comfortable saying Vermont is not willing to make this risky move.
Yeah.
Right there. That's the strongest argument. That's the argument I fall on. That is the argument I fall on. That's the argument I've fallen on for the past month or so. I know you believe this. It's like I know you have this belief that this particular convention idea is an awesome idea. And that once you get there, somehow, some force, some power can constrain what these guys do. I've even heard Cenk make this point of, well, we can just argue the other stuff. I don't understand why. It's like arguing doesn't work in any other capacity of politics. Why do you expect it to work at that particular convention? But besides the point, I think he's right. It's like, how are you so certain? Like, how are you this certain that this particular process is going to turn out the way you think it's going to turn out? And do you really want to risk literally opening up the Constitution itself to these guys, the majority of which are from deep, deep red states, and even among Democrats, are not necessarily the most upstanding of citizens, at least from an integrity standpoint? I don't trust Democrats. I don't trust Republicans. I think these parties are the problem. Do I have faith in either of these parties going and opening the Constitution up to make changes? No. No, I don't. I don't at all. And again, this is the crux of the argument. If you believe that you are more certain than not that you can open up the Constitution and completely constrain what takes place, then yeah, you're going to fall on the side of Wolfpack. I want my constitutional convention. If you believe, oh man, that's too much of a risk, I don't necessarily want to end up in a worse situation than what we're already in, then yeah, you're going to end up on my side, on this guy's side. Oh yeah, I want money out of politics. I do feel we need to do something about it, but I don't want to shoot myself in the foot in the process of trying to do something about it. I don't want to make my situation worse. I think that argument is just an amazing argument. So let's see. I guess it's up to Cenk to respond to it.
Yeah, so there is a lot that I disagree with there. First of all, I think the current state of affairs is horrific. So I think what's super risky is saying, well, let's not have a good battle plan for getting money out of politics. So let me pause there. I have so many things to say, but do you think Congress, 2/3 of Congress, is going to get money out of politics? That they're going to ask for that amendment?
No, not at all.
So then, what's your battle plan then?
This is kind of my point. He's completely ignoring what the guy's saying. The guy is making this point of, the guy's being absolutely reasonable as can be. He's like, look, we can argue on whether or not. We can't, essentially the guy's making this point, we can't be certain. Neither one of us can be certain on this point. Neither one of us knows how this will unfold. Because neither one of us knows how this will unfold, I am erring on the side of caution. That is as sensible can be. Now, Cenk's argument, he, for the most part, blows past this argument and makes this case of, yeah, but what is your plan? What is your plan? What are you going to do? What is your plan? Do you think it's a risky prospect not to do anything? And if that's the case, what are you going to do to try to fix this issue? That's besides the point. That's besides the point. If the thing that you're doing may make the situation worse, then why are you doing it? It's like action just for the sake of action. I understand where he's coming from. He's aggressive. He's like, I want to do something about this. Fair enough. I can respect that. But if you're not certain, if you're not very clear that what you're trying to do about it is going to fix the issue, or if you're not even certain that what you're going to do about it is going to somehow make the situation worse or potentially make the situation worse, how do you justify that action? Or at the very least, how do you justify that action to the degree of certainty that it seems like Cenk is kind of pushing here? I just disagree with him. I'm being more cautious on this front.
Well, in my case, I've introduced a bill last year to have public financing of elections in Vermont. I'm about to introduce the same bill this year, kind of new and improved.
So that's wonderful for Vermont, which is one of the most liberal states in the country. So the rest of us have to just wallow in the corruption, and not only that, it's at the local level, and it's doesn't apply to the national level, right?
Obviously, there's limited things I can do as a state legislator, but I have to wallow in the.
Well, actually, one of the great things you could do is call for a convention, which would actually affect all of us.
Yeah, potentially negatively. Potentially negatively. He just keeps blowing past that point. It's like he just doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that, hey, maybe the thing that you're trying to do is not the best thing in the world. When you're playing chess, you have situations where I can see a particular plan that the person is coming up with. There are times when you let that person go through with that plan because that plan is not in that person's best interest, even though that person thinks it's in their best interest. I'm not saying that this is some kind of conspiracy or anything. I'm just making this point that action, just for the sake of action, doesn't necessarily mean it's good. I get he wants to do something. Like he's being very adamant about, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I want to do something that doesn't injure me more than the way I'm already injured. That's what I want to do. If that means not doing anything in the short term, that means not doing anything in the short term. It's not a bad position if the position that you think you're going to take is going to adversely affect you more than just standing pat. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that the guy doesn't want money out of politics. This is the shallow argument I've heard. Certainly, the guy was going for Wolfpack at first. Certainly, he wants money out of politics. He came to a different conclusion of, wait a minute, this seems sketchy to me. This doesn't seem like a good idea. Yes, I want money out of politics, but no, I don't want to do something that may make the situation worse. How do you blow past that argument? I just don't see how you blow past it. At the very least, you should acknowledge it as being, okay, fair enough, but I don't quite believe that that's going to be the way it turns out. That's the argument. That's the crux of the argument. But both of those arguments are valid. Like, I just don't think you can completely... It depends on how aggressive you want to be. In this particular situation, I don't need to be aggressive. I would prefer not to put myself in a situation where we're worse off. I could be wrong on that. Fair enough. I could totally be wrong on that. But so could you. And there's no way for you to be certain that the way this is going to turn out is the way that Cenk Uygur is thinking it's going to turn out. It's conjecture. He believes it. But there's no way for him to know that. Certainty is nowhere to be found in this situation. So,
if we got the results out of a convention that you and I would favor and that didn't favor big money, I think one of the reasons why the Koch brothers are promoting a constitutional convention is they have confidence in their own ability to then influence the process through their ungodly sums of money.
I want to get to the Koch brothers influencing the process in a second, but first let me correct a couple of things. The original Constitutional Convention was not an Article 5 convention because Article 5 didn't exist at the time. That's part of the United States Constitution. They were operating under completely different rules. They were operating under the Articles of Confederation. So those two conventions would not be the same thing. And so in fact, the Founding Fathers built two different ways in Article 5 to get an amendment. And they did that because they were revolutionaries and they wanted you to amend the document. They wanted you to have two different ways of doing it. If Washington was too corrupt, you were supposed to go to the state level to senators like you. And I think that you agree that, or let me ask you, do you agree that Washington is too corrupt?
I don't know what that has to do with the price of tea in China. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. He's ignoring the guy's point. The guy made a point. He completely bypassed it and went straight to the argument of, yeah, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to get money out of politics? You're not going to do anything about it? You're not going to do anything about it? Certainly you realize that all action is not good action. That's the point. That's the point. If you're going to engage the guy's argument, you need to show that what he's saying is irrelevant. Meaning his worries, his concerns, the way you win this argument with him is to get across in a clear and honest way. I understand you have concerns about the Constitutional Convention. I get it. You believe that with this many Republicans, or for that matter, with this amount of money flowing into the process, that for the most part, a situation can end up that puts this country at a disadvantage and worse off than what we were to start with. That's what you have to confront. Like, that's the argument that you need to confront to win this case. Telling him about the first Constitutional Convention and giving him a history on it doesn't really do that. That doesn't address that issue at all. Yes, you found something where the guy was slightly imprecise on, but the thing you've found that he was imprecise on doesn't touch his argument. His argument stands. And let me tell it stands untouched. It stands untouched.
Right now?
Yes, I do, but you also have to respect that the founders, part of the vision here of spreading this power out to the states was their belief that you would never have so much power concentrated in one direction when you push it out to the states. That's not the case today, right? I mean, Democrats control 13
they're not on the record
states.
talking about that at all. They're worried about.
Well, but that's their basic theory of operation was dilute the power and push it out to the states when in doubt. Keep it away from the feds and push it out to the states.
Exactly, which is exactly why they let you do conventions through the states. And it's not when things are going well and things are in balance. You're supposed to do that when things are not going well. And Washington is too controlled by one interest and too corrupt. So look, you're worried about, and I get it, you're worried about Koch brothers' influence. I hear you on that. I mean, that's a huge problem, right? I mean, for example, what if they were to spend money to influence the delegates that go to the convention, right?
Exactly.
That's right, okay. Now, what do you think happens in Congress when the Koch brothers spend money to influence Congress?
It works very well for them.
It does. So right now, we're already in the worst case scenario that you are worried about.
That's not true. This is not the worst case scenario. I can think of worst case scenarios, starting with opening up the Constitution and making changes to the Constitution that adversely affects the entire country. I mean, come on. Look, I get that a lot of people fall on this idea of, yes, let's open up the Constitution, this Wolfpack thing. I am still a member of Wolfpack, even though I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing. But I understand why they're doing it. I understand the reasoning behind it. I get it, totally. But are you telling me that this guy doesn't have a fair point? I know you're also telling me that Cenk is actually addressing this issue of what happens if they open the Constitution, and whether those guys are bought, whether those guys just for whatever reason agree on some weird idea to fundamentally change the Constitution of the United States. I understand this thing of, like, do you think that they're bought in the federal government? Yes. Do you think that government works? No. Do you think this is a worst case scenario? No, I don't. I disagree with that. I don't think this is a worst case scenario. I can think of a worst case scenario, and it starts with opening up the Constitution to people who do not have the interests of the country at heart. I understand what he's saying. I mean, I understand what he's saying. I get his point. He's just saying, look, there's no way to get anything done through the federal government. That's fair. That's totally fair. He's right. It's also fair to say that these guys are bought, and you can literally chart their legislation, which is usually based on their donors, not the interest of the public. So again, he's right. Fair point. I just don't understand why he thinks that that's isolated to the federal government. You have 66 out of 99 state legislatures belonging to Republicans. Who do you think the delegates are going to be? And are you telling me that they can't find a few Democrats to turncoat for whatever reason, whether they're getting paid, whether they just agree with some of these weird things like a balanced budget amendment? You feel perfectly confident about that. I'm just not perfectly confident about it. I don't know why Cenk is.
Where they can influence the people who they control, and they control a great majority of Congress. And by the way, if you're worried about the parade of horribles that they could do it today. They could just do it through Congress.
No, they can't.
Because you're saying 2/3 of the states or 2/3 of Congress. It's the very, very similar issues, and they buy them today. That's why we're in the worst case scenario.
So they don't have 2/3 of the Senate. I'm not sure if they do have 2/3 of the House, they barely have it. So there is some protection that remains even in this dysfunctional Congress. And the problem with thinking that we're at the worst is that these guys are proving over and over that the worst is yet to come, and it's just subject to the imagination of these corporate bidders and the horrors of I have 2 little kids. I'm watching the planet melt around us. And
why is that happening?
Coal, right?
But why is that happening? It's happening because of the money in politics.
Yeah,
and now you're saying we're going to unilaterally disarm. But Senator, they are going to do their convention with or without us. They have 120 calls for a convention that they could activate tomorrow. And so you're saying, well, we should take away our 5 calls for a convention to get money out of politics. And by the way, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify. And you know that they don't have 3/4 of the states. You stated it just a while ago. At a worst case scenario, we have 13 double blue states and plenty of other states with blue legislatures in one of the chambers. So you guys put out this parade of horribles of like, oh my God, they could do the pro-life abortion, as if the convention is the only step. Our Constitution is one of the toughest constitutions in the world to amend. In fact, most experts say it is the toughest, because you got to get 2/3 of the states or 2/3 of Congress, and then 3/4 of states to ratify. There's only one thing that 3/4 of states agree on, which is the corrupting influence of money in politics. 90% of Americans agree to that. 90% of Americans don't agree to a pro-life amendment. In fact, 2/3 of Americans are pro-choice. So to say, oh my God, fear-mongering, oh no, they're gonna do a pro-life amendment, as if they could do it carte blanche. That's not how the system is built.
That's his strongest argument. That is Cenk's strongest argument. Like I said, you have to contest. If he wants to win this case, digging around the sides about all this stuff about we need to do it now, we need to do it now. That doesn't matter. That doesn't contest this point. The point that the guy is putting out is, this is dangerous to do. He's contesting that, saying, you guys are overblowing this. It's not as dangerous as you think it is, ultimately. In order to do anything, you need X amount of people to ratify the Constitution. Meaning, just because somebody puts up something doesn't necessarily mean that particular thing is going to be ratified. And that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's the strongest argument. I just don't know why he's that certain. Yeah, I'm just not that certain. But this is the strongest case.
So when you put out that, I can do the slippery slope in the opposite direction. Oh my God, what if they do that in Congress? Oh my God, what if they do this and what if they do that if we keep the system as it is? And by the way, they have. They melted the planet on our watch while we just sat there and did nothing about money in politics.
So the thing is that the Constitution as it stands now is actually proving to be the only check we have. If you look at these ridiculous Muslim bans and things like that, we are seeing the Constitution play out a role that is healthy and protecting us. Would I like to see the Constitution go further? Of course I would. But part of your argument seems to be that we are in any way going to be able to eradicate the evils of big money through the Constitutional Convention process. I'm just not seeing that.
Because you won't let us go to the convention. That's why you're not seeing it.
If I'm wrong, okay, and they don't want to combine these separate calls, and suddenly there's 25 states who have come on board with what Vermont has done previously, and what 4 other states have done. Call me up. I will be glad to revisit this issue. But
no, you don't get to rescind it, and then we have to go through tremendous volunteer blood, sweat, and tears, and very little money that we have to relitigate that battle in Vermont. So look, let me ask you this. Do you know if there's other calls for convention in Vermont right now?
Not that are live, according to our research.
So unfortunately, that's not true. There's a live one from, believe it or not, 1912. And Vermont called for a convention to get an amendment to end polygamy. Okay, so now the reason I bring that up is Senator Pearson, I don't think that you went out of your way to go get the one on money in politics. But I'm not positive that the people who scared you in this direction told you about that. I think they told you about the one in money in politics and said, go get that one.
Who do you think scared me in this direction exactly?
Okay.
Yeah, this is just getting crappy at this point. Oh, I don't want to engage your argument. I engaged it a little bit, but now I'm just going to say somebody scared you into a particular direction. You're not working in your own agency. Somebody prodded you along and you're just giving talking points to somebody else. Yeah, that's kind of gross. That's kind of gross. The guy's giving you a fair argument. The guy seems like he's being perfectly earnest in giving you that argument. Why are you acting like somebody fear-mongered the guy into a particular decision? Is it possible that he just disagrees with your position? Is that possible?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I don't know. So what was the precipitating event that made you go from voting for this to not only voting against it, but working to try to rescind it? Because that's a big change. What was the event?
A friend of mine had done a master's thesis about this way back in the 60s. Brought it to my attention, some of the questions that we're talking about today. And I was skeptical because I was pleased to support the idea that we could fix Citizens United this way. And so I started doing some research. I reached out to my Congressman, Peter Welsh, who gave his office furnished me a bunch of the congressional research staff.
Interesting, okay.
And so I uncovered it that way, I put it in. I think you've referenced Common Cause in other segments. I wasn't until I had already filed the resolution that I found that document, their document. Nobody has lobbied me or approached me on this other than a friend of mine who had quite a lot of knowledge about it and is very interested, by the way, in getting big money out of politics and other reforms for voting rights, electoral college, and so forth.
So let me review. You asked a national Democrat who got into office through this system, and lo and behold, he had a whole bunch of talking points ready for you when you called, saying that this system is one that should not be changed, and that the system that put him in the United States Congress is the one that we should target. Well, that's unbelievable.
That's just not fair at all.
Yeah, at this point, I could skip this because he's just being an asshole. I mean, engage the guy's argument. It's like you're having a conversation with somebody. The guy disagrees with you. His disagreement with you is not crazy at all. His disagreement makes perfect sense. And you do contest it somewhat. I mean, he did engage him. But then you take it to this other level of somebody put you up to this. And then turn it to some weird conspiracy theory of, oh, I see, you're talking to some corporate Democrat. And that Democrat is pushing you in a particular direction. If you honestly think that this is a good way to argue, oh, dude, it's not. It's not. I'm going to fast forward and see if they actually have something substantive to talk about where he's not just bringing up conspiracy theories.
For office 6 times. This is the first time I've ever run with an endorsement from the Democratic Party. I've never taken a dime of corporate money. I've been endorsed by Bernie every time. The last time I just ran for the state Senate, I had some 17,000 donations. My average donation was $4.50. So I am in no way a stooge of the Democratic Party. I
don't think you
share a lot of your frustration with their generally corporate outlook. It's not fair to say that the Democratic Party, or even Congressman Peter Welch, who does take corporate money, and it bothers me, but is generally a member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, generally easily among the top 25 congressmen in the country right now, I would argue. He didn't have influence. I just used his office to get access to some of the congressional research stuff. Again, your argument that they could do it right now, well, maybe that's true. I happen to think it is true because these guys don't play by the rules of any kind of common sense or decency. But Arizona just passed their resolution a couple of weeks ago. So time is of the essence. Let me ask you a question. If we were at 34 calls for just Citizens United, okay, remove the question of combining different calls. If we were at that call, do you really think the Republicans in Congress and the extreme right-wing money that controls them is going to allow a constitutional convention to unfold where we diminish the power of money in politics? Do you really think that?
So let me explain. So first of all, I don't trust the Republicans one bit. I believe that they will use their power to accrue more power. I am not 1% naive about their intentions.
I believe that.
Now, what I won't do is shred the Constitution or a tool of democracy to try to block things that I don't think they have the power to do anyway. So if you said to me, hey, are you really worried about what Republicans might do if they get into office? I would say yes. If you said to me, and is that why we should prevent a vote? I would say no, hell no.
Right.
If you said, hey, are you worried about what the Republicans are going to do in Congress now? I would say yes, I'm very worried. If you said, let's get rid of Congress, I would say no, hell no. So if you say to me, hey, there's a part in the Constitution that says that you should be able to get an amendment through the states, are you worried about what the Republicans might do there? I would say yes. If you said to me, should we get rid of it or never use it or rescind any calls for a convention? I would say no, hell no. I do not agree to shredding that part of the Constitution. I do not agree with unilaterally disarming and saying because they can do a convention, we shouldn't do one.
Nobody is saying not to use it. I mean, it's, the guy even said it himself. He was like, look, if you get to the point where you're ready to put this out, bring me back up. Now, granted, Cenk is kind of right on this point of, dude, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to try to get these amendments through states. But nobody is making this case of, yeah, let's just chuck it. The case that I think people are making is, dude, this looks a little terrifying. They have a huge amount of influence. Why are you so certain that that influence is going to be used in a way that's to your benefit? That's the part that I miss him on. But look, at the very least, he's engaging the argument. He's making his case on, this is why I believe this is a good idea. Whether you take his case or not, that is his case. That's the strongest aspect of his case. I think, he's like, I think what you're talking about is overblown. I don't think it's as big of a deal as I think you think it is. We'll have our vote. If it's true the Republicans are bought. They are. If it's true that Democrats are bought, they are. I don't know why you trust either of these guys, particularly to open the Constitution up, particularly now. But that is a valid point. It's like, yes, you have the opportunity to do something about it. Fair enough. Again, this argument, I'm uncertain. I'm just not certain about my cautiousness comes from just not being certain about it. He seems to be pretty adamant and pretty certain, and I tend to be distrustful of people who are just certain, because there's no reason for you to be that certain about it. But this is the strongest argument. It's overblown. It's overblown. They have a particular strategy in mind where we can go through the states. I want to go through the states to try to get money out of politics. That's the crux. If you believe that it's overblown, you're probably going to be on Cenk's side. If you believe that there is a chance that with this many conservatives sending delegates to a constitutional convention, it's just a little sketchy. That's all I'm saying.
You should fight them on the merits. And look, if you're the kind of senator I think you are, and that's why I think you supported us in the beginning, and Bernie supports you, etc., you fight them on the merits. We would shred them on a balanced budget amendment. The guys in Washington that you're talking to, and again, I bet you that Peter Welch is not a bad guy. But I know Democratic leadership doesn't want to go forward on this. So they put out talking points, and it goes to every staffer of every Democrat. Hey, if anybody at the state level calls you, or sometimes you should actively call them, tell them you should rescind the calls for any convention. You know why? It's not even that they're against getting money out of politics. They're against any change, because this is their system. They don't want to change the system. So when you say, hey, there's
it's hard for me to defend national Democrats, but it is possible that they're afraid of the ramifications of putting Congress in charge of this
Pearson, I understand that, but you know what?
So it's not that they're concerned about opening the Constitution. That has nothing to do with it. It's just that they're against change. Come on, man. This is a shallow argument. It's just, look, you can make your point without delegitimizing the argument of the other person. The guy is being earnest. He's being open. He clearly wanted to get money out of politics. You can't just deal with the argument from that standpoint. Why do you have to go into this thing of you're being pushed, you're being manipulated in some way? The other Democrats, they're not bad people per se. They just don't want anything to change. They just want the status quo to remain. Why are we talking about the other Democrats when you and I are having a conversation about whether or not going through with a constitutional amendment is the best cause of action, and whether or not going through with that amendment may actually hurt our cause? That's the conversation. He's talking about Democrats, and he's talking about, like there's some shady conspiracy theory in the background that's trying to prevent him from getting money out of politics because the Democratic Party just wants status quo. That may or may not be true. But that's not the case that this guy is presenting him with. This guy is being earnest, and he's saying, I have concerns. I personally have concerns. I don't like the Democratic Party. I don't like either one of these parties. I'm not being pushed by a party to take a position. I'm being pushed by my intelligence to look at it and say, wait a minute, there's a lot of them. I don't trust them. And they're going to open up the Constitution and make certain changes to that Constitution. Now, you can call me a coward in this way. Fair enough. I would say it's looking at a situation and realizing the consequences of that particular situation. But whatever, however you want to cast it. But you can't say that what I'm saying is not true. You can't say that what this guy is saying is not true. You can devalue it. You can say it's not as important as the guy's making it. Fair enough. I would disagree with you, but you can't do that. But are you really telling me that going from that conversation that they were having a decent conversation, and to go from that to you're being pushed, the Democratic Party is out essentially pushing you a particular way. I know the Democratic Party is doing this. They just don't want change. They just want status quo. They just want to keep things the way they are. That's the narrative. That's Cenk's narrative. That narrative is not necessarily indicative of reality. It may or may not be true, but it has nothing to do with the conversation that him and this guy are having. That's the point I'm getting at.
I'm afraid of the situation we're in today. Yeah. So when you fight against change, I say, are we winning? Are progressives winning? That we don't want any change, we just want the status quo. No, we're getting mauled out here. Change is to our benefit, not to their benefit. So yes, when they propose a convention of their own, and they have every constitutional and democratic right to do that, and I will fight them tooth and nail on that, and I will lead the charge in defeating them. But when we propose a convention for us, for positive change, it is insane to be on the opposite side of that and say, no, I don't want any change, period. I'm going to rescind calls for all conventions. I'm going to unilaterally disarm. Out of the 700 calls for a convention, I'm going to target the 5 that are to get money out of politics. Now, I don't think you would do that actively, but yes, I do believe the National Democrats tell almost every state legislator, they scare every state legislator into no change.
Well, I can only speak in my own chamber, 30 senators, 23 of us affiliated with the Democratic Party. I don't believe any of us were reached by a Democratic Party official or anything. I took it upon myself. I happened to reach out to Congressman Welsh because I know him a little bit. But there's anyway.
But Senator Pearson, look, it's about a groupthink, and so. You happen to talk to Peter Welch, and you happen to go to Common Cause, and Common Cause happen to have their talking points ready too.
This is just conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy theory. Yeah, this is conspiracy theory. He's telling me about Common Cause. He's telling me about all this other stuff. The guy who you're having a conversation with is sitting right there in front of you. Why are you talking about Common Cause? Why are you talking about the other Democrats? The guy even made the point of, look, I can tell you, among the 20-some Democrats, none of us were contacted, in order to maintain his narrative of events. Well, you were contacted. That's not the conversation that they had. I mean, look, it's just an amazing thing where they're having a conversation. They're having a relatively decent conversation. And he takes it to this level of, it's a conspiracy. No, you're not doing this on your own power. Well, I kind of trust you, but for the most part, I know that the Democrats are working behind the scenes. And even going to the point of calling it groupthink. Why can't you just have the conversation with the guy who's sitting in front of you? And why can't you make your case as to why that guy is wrong? Because you haven't made that case. You've made your points, at the very least in the way you see your points. But again, you need to break down this idea that this guy's wrong. In order to make the point that this guy's wrong, that his concerns are unjustified. You have not made that clear to me at all. I mean, I understand your feelings about it, where you're thinking that, no, we can go there, we can have a constitutional convention, and those people are going to close it, and if anything else comes up, we're just going to argue that point. I understand your point. I understand where you're coming from. I disagree with that. And I do think that there's cause to be concerned. You're opening up the Constitution. Why are you this certain? That's all I'm saying. Why are you this certain? And stop trying to tar the guy. Like, why is it so difficult just to engage the guy's argument? Why are you bringing in all of these other things that you're hitting? I mean, it comes across as being extremely biased. And I understand you're with Wolfpack. I understand that for the most part, this is his belief system. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's fine. It's on the table. Everybody knows about it. But don't you think that if somebody's making this case where they're saying, look, I think I'm concerned about this. I think there's potential for us to injure ourselves. And the other person is like, no, there's no chance of that. There's no chance of that. We need to do this. We need to just completely do it. And in every way, it's casting the argument as, you just don't want change. You just want status quo. There's groupthink. There's people behind the scenes doing so-and-so. The guy is sitting there in front of them saying, no, I'm concerned about this. No, I wasn't contacted. No, nobody put me up to it. No, I'm not being bought. No, I don't take money from any of this stuff. I, individual, am concerned that if they open up the Constitution, we could end up in a worse situation than what we're already in. Look, I'm not going to show the entirety of it, but watch the video yourself. I'm showing just aspects of the video where they're having this conversation between these two. And I'm kind of making this point. When he's arguing this stuff, he's arguing in a way that's, I don't know, it's just slightly gross. It's like, just deal with the guy's point. Have a conversation with the guy. He's sitting right there in front of you. It's good that you brought him on. I imagine you brought him on so you guys could talk. All right, talk. Take his intentions as being earnest, because he's given no indication that the guy's bought. I'm usually looking for the incentive in somebody to behave a particular way. I think the incentives give you this idea of a certain level of truth. If this guy's getting a whole bunch of money, he takes a particular position, then yeah, I'm going to believe that the money influenced that position. Do you believe that this guy is functioning in that capacity? Like, just from this conversation, and again, look at the interview yourself. Do you honestly believe that this guy is functioning in a way where he's being pushed, he's being prodded, he's taking money for some particular ends? Or do you think the argument he's making is being earnest? Whether you agree with the argument or not is irrelevant. I said this in another video. Whether you agree with Common Cause or Uygur is irrelevant to me. At the very least, give the argument the credibility it deserves. He's being earnest with the Cenk, and he's giving Cenk's argument earnest gravity. He just disagrees with it. But for whatever reason, disagreeing is just not on the agenda. And so when the guy puts up this thing of, look, I'm concerned that they can open up the Constitution and that can cause issues. That's not enough. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be enough. Cenk looks at it and says, that's not a reason enough for me. That's fair. Of course you can do that. That's the whole crux of the argument. Is this enough of a reason not to do it? Yes or no? But then to take it to this extra step of, there's these shady figures in the background that's somehow influencing these events and is trying to stop us in our goal of getting money out of politics. Yeah, I don't believe that. I think you can totally want money out of politics. You could totally want this country to be different. You could totally not like the status quo and completely disagree with the plan that he's trying to go with. Those things are mutually exclusive from one another. Casting it, essentially framing it in a way that tries to make it like either you're with us or you're against change. It's shallow. It's just a shallow argument.
Somebody sent it to me after I had already filed
That's right. And so, but what I know is that all throughout the country, Maryland, New Mexico, Hawaii, Vermont, in almost every state, somehow the Democratic legislators went from being in favor of a convention, I know because we've been doing this since 2011, to all of a sudden switching. What was the precipitating event? I know what the precipitating event was. I saw it in every single state. Both Democratic lobbyists, national Democratic politicians decided, no, we're not going to do a convention. Go tell every Democrat in all these states the correct talking point is no convention at all. How about one on our behalf? No change. That is a talking point that is real, and that is what precipitated all of this.
Wouldn't you say the world's a little different than it was in 2011? I mean,
no, but they did it under Obama. They did it last year in Maryland under Obama. I know that Democratic leadership called in Maryland.
Money. Of course, but
it's not Trump. So please, look.
No.
Don't use that excuse.
Well, okay, it's not Trump. It's the entire cast of characters and their shameless bending of the rules to suit their needs. And this is the thing. These guys are like judo masters. They could take our call and throw us to the floor with it. And suddenly we have like even less campaign finance rules after these guys are through with the process. I mean, truly, do you honestly think this Congress is going to create a system that has a healthy and fair debate over the role of money in Congress and in our politics? I just think that's totally naive and wishful thinking. And I think the stakes where we are now, we have seen in the last several years a total disregard for decency and common sense out of national leaders, whether it's a Supreme Court nomination, on and on and on and on. I just think it's a risky endeavor. So I'm not acting on behalf of the Democratic Party or anybody else. I just look at the facts as I understand them, and I conclude, not with tons of confidence in either direction. I just conclude there's a lot of risk here and a lot at stake, and I'm uncomfortable opening up that door and contributing to opening the door.
But, okay, Senator, so first of all, again, at your level, I completely believe you that is how you have arrived at this conclusion. But I do know that at the macro level, at the national level, this is going on in every single state, and it is not an accident. And I also know that the National Democrats and the lobbyists and the common cause of the world know that there are 700 calls, but they're targeting the 5 calls for the Money Out of Politics Convention anyway. And they conveniently don't do research in every single state. Vermont's not the only state. They don't target the other calls, they target this one. And it's not because, and not everybody involved, and I don't think Peter Welch thinks, no, I want to keep money in politics. I don't know his intentions, right? But I know that they think change is not good. But what I'm telling you right now, and I think what an overwhelming majority of Democrats, progressives, and in fact the whole country agrees is, status quo is not good. You're afraid of change, I'm afraid of the status quo. And I think the overwhelming majority of the American people are with me. So I'm not afraid to fight Republicans. I'll go to their convention, and it's not their convention. And to answer your question, who sets the rules for a convention? States can set those rules. New Hampshire has set their rules in their call for a convention. And if their delegates go outside of those rules, then they can withdraw those delegates. So it is a rare case where the corrupt Congress does not set the rules. Actually, the states do. We've had over 200 conventions at the state level. All the constitutions remain intact. None of the demagoguery actually came to fruition. None of the fear mongering actually came to fruition. No one trashed their constitution and started over. All those 50 states' constitutions are perfectly intact, and we've had over 200 conventions at the state level. It is not something to be feared. It is a tool of democracy to be used. And if we voluntarily do not use it for our purposes because we're afraid of what they're going to do, all we're doing is hurting ourselves. If you say to me, hey, Cenk, let's go make sure that the balanced budget convention doesn't happen, I'm right there with you, brother. Okay, yeah. And I will fight tooth and nail.
You tell me how Vermont helps that go. We don't have a call for a balanced budget. I would.
Good argument. Yeah, good argument. Again, I think that's his strongest point. I just don't see the point of this other stuff. It's almost like he's trying to delegitimize the guy. That's a good argument. That's a damn good argument. And in fact, that's probably his strongest point. It's like, look, all this fear-mongering and demagoguery, yeah, that stuff is probably not going to come to pass. Ultimately, this is a tool of our government. The federal government is bought. We need to find a way to get money out of politics. This is a way to do it. And I don't believe that all of these ills and these scares will come to pass. All right, fair point. Fair point. I disagree, but it's a fair point. Let me know what you think. If you enjoy the content, feel free to write, feel free to comment, or share, or like. And also, you can always support the work through Patreon. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. It hasn't changed my mind on it, but look at the whole interview and see which side you lean more on. The interview is about 48 minutes. I've shown most of it. I think I've shown like 2/3 of it, but I skipped portions where I thought he was just browbeating the guy or just not necessarily dealing with the actual issue. But give me your opinion. What do you think? Whose side do you err on? All right, guys. Have a good one.